So today is the open student Q&A to give you an opportunity to ask any final questions that you might have about your research paper that you're working on, that you're putting the final touches on. So in service of that submission, which is coming up Sunday at midnight, we have this session here as your chance to ask any questions that you might have encountered. We can clear up anything that you might be confused about. Basically, whatever you need in order to make sure that you are ready to put that paper, that final paper, all together. All right, so at that point, I'll open it up to all of you, and just let me know if there's any questions you have or things you might want to see or anything else that'll help you out to write your research paper. Mm-hmm.
How long does the introduction have to be?
The introduction, typically for this paper, I have found about 2.5 to 3 pages to be the kind of typical length for a well-written introduction. In the real world, your introduction is as long as it needs to be to kind of hit all of those markers that I gave for the introduction. So if you basically, let's see if I have that readily available. If you do your introduction and you follow the outline that I gave for the introduction, then you will just by necessity have to, you'll end up with 2.5 to 3 pages. So when you're doing your introduction section, this is your outline. Make sure that you are hitting all 5 of these issues. So start with that real world phenomenon. And there are points for this, and it is amazing how many students don't. But this is your way of allowing the reader to understand what it is that you are going to be telling them. It is to understand without filling it with a lot of technical jargon right off the bat. So this is basically, it can be a hypothetical one. You could pull one from the news. You can pull one from popular culture, whatever it is that you want to use, that illustrates the 2 key ideas that we're thinking about, which is false memory and group cognition. So some example of a situation or an example from our culture where a group remembered things incorrectly. And if you are having trouble coming up with ideas for that, one of the terms that is used as a catch-all for these instances is called the Mandela effect. So there was a rumor that went around, I think in the 80s, that Nelson Mandela was dead, and it turns out he was not dead, but this was believed by a large amount of people before email and social media and all these sort of things. So it's one of these interesting sort of like mass cognition type things. So make sure that you mention something like that, because it's not going to be technical, and it'll allow your reader to kind of say, okay, you guys are going to, this paper is going to be about false memories, is going to be about group memories. So you're looking at about a paragraph, for that. Then you're going to introduce the past research. You're going to have to explain what reconstructive memory is. So you're going to give the definition for reconstructive memory. You're going to talk about theories about reconstructive memory, like what Roediger and McDermott believe. How does reconstructive memory work? So that's going to be 1 paragraph at least for the reconstructive memory. Then you're going to have 1 paragraph at least for group cognition, because you need to say, that was reconstructive memory. We're also going to be looking at group cognition. This is what group cognition is. This is how it works. This is what some theories think is going on. This is some of the issues or some of the evidence for group cognition. So you're going to introduce the past research. This is where you're going to cite the most in your introduction, because you're going to be talking about other people's work. Then you're going to show, so this is already going to be over a page by the time you're done with those. Then you're going to show a gap in the research. by this point, it should be really evident where you're going with this story. It should be very evident where you're going with this through line in your narrative. But one thing to keep in mind as you're writing, putting the final touches on your research paper, it has to be spelled out for the reader. So spell it out. So it should be clear by the time you're done here that what's missing is group cognition, false memory, right? How does false memory work in groups? But you need to lay it out for the reader. You need to say, there's been a lot of work done on reconstructive memory and false memory. There's been a lot of work done on group cognition and group memory, but there seems to be not a lot has been done, or maybe nothing's been done on false memories in the group. So that's a gap. That's something that needs to be explained. That's what our research is going to be about. So then you say, that's what we're going to do. We're going to test people in a group setting and in a single setting. We're going to take a look at false memories versus real memories, and we're going to see how that all plays out. So this will be at least a paragraph, that'll be at least a paragraph, and then you end with your hypotheses, where your hypothesis at least, where you say, if this is true, if this theory is true, and we test groups and singles for false memories, then this is what should occur. If this other theory is true, and we do the same thing, then this thing should occur, and that'll at least be another paragraph. So all in all, we're looking at like 2.5 to 3 for the total. One thing to also keep in mind while we're on this subject is do make sure that you are spelling things out for the reader, especially in the introduction and in the discussion section. So if you're a good writer and you're organizing your information and presenting it in this way, it should be really sort of evident what's coming up next. You're really telegraphing to your reader, what's coming up next. But you need to spell it out for them. So much like we've mentioned before, it's almost like that murder mystery novel. If you ever take a look at the history of the murder mystery novel, they actually had a group, kind of like a society of murder mystery novel writers, and Agatha Christie was part of it, and G.K. Chesterton was part of this group. And they came up with the rules of the mystery novel. One of the rules that they came up with was that the crime has to be large, right? It has to be a really big crime. That's why you never read about the petty theft mystery novel, right? Because nobody cares. It's the murder mystery novel. But the other rule that they came up with was that you needed to present enough information that an intelligent person could solve the mystery, right? That was another rule for the thing. Same thing here. You need to present enough information that an intelligent person will notice that there's a gap, right? But the same way that you don't get to the end of a murder mystery novel and the detective comes in and he goes, well, do you remember when we only found one shoe outside the doorstop that night? And do you remember how the killer was left-handed and yet the scuff marks on his coat were on the right side? And do you remember how it was raining that night, but when we looked at the footprints, there was no evidence of mud? Do you remember all that information? And the people are like, yeah. The detective never goes, well, you know who I'm thinking about. And the people go, yeah, that's right. And then that's the end of it, right? Because you should be able to solve it, but again, you spell it out for the reader. You say, well, this means this means that, and that means that this person's the murderer. Same thing here. You say, look, all this research on reconstructive memory, done with singles. All of the research on groups, not done on false memories. They're missing that. That's what we're going to fill. That's what we're doing this experiment for. This is what we should find. So do make sure that you're explicit. And also with the conclusions in your discussion, it's the same thing. When you say, oh, here are the results of the experiment, and they support Roeder and McDermott's theory of reconstructive memory, an intelligent reader will take a look at that and say, yeah, they do, right? I know exactly where they support it, but spell it out. Say, this is what supports it, right? There were large levels of false memories, just like they found with Roeder and McDermott. There was clearly reconstruction going on. There, the no versus, spell it out for them in terms of what our results actually mean. going to assume the lack of questions means that everybody is rock solid on their research paper at this point. I guess that's a good sign. If you're not rock solid, now's a good time to ask.
Should we be talking about like the confidence levels, or like how important is that to our results?
The answer to that is yes, you should be talking about the confidence intervals. And then the answer to the second question is it depends on your hypotheses. So the confidence intervals need to be in your results section. So first and foremost, absolutely for sure, your confidence levels need to be in your results section. So you have the results section that we worked on in class, percent recall, and then right below that you got part 2, which is confidence levels. So on the one hand, that has to be in there. On the other hand, when you're doing your conclusions in your discussion section, if you didn't find, if you didn't develop a hypothesis based on confidence levels, right? If you didn't end your introduction section here with something that said, according to Roediger and McDermott and their remember versus know paradigm, this should lead to high confidence, whereas this should lead to low confidence. Right? Unless you had something that specifically talked about confidence level in the hypothesis, then you won't have to discuss it in the discussion. So you don't have to force it in there. Because we talked about it in the results section, use what you need to make the case that you're trying to make. Now, one thing though that to keep in mind when you're doing your discussion section, if you need to kind of revise it, if you don't have maybe enough support, remember that a lot of these studies talk about improved memory or better memory in general. So you'll have better memory in groups, but not as good as you would pooling individuals working alone, right? That's one of the things that Walden and Bellinger found. And you can, if you want to, you can bridge those gaps, because better memory means higher percent recall, and also better memory means higher confidence for the truth, right? So if somebody, there's kind of 4 different versions of it. If somebody says to you, when is the P211 class? When's your P211 class? And you say, let me check my memory. And you're like, it's 2:30. 2:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I am sure. You would look at that person and you would say, that person has good memory because they're right and they're highly confident. Being right alone doesn't really fit with our feelings of good memory. So if somebody says, well, when is your P211 class? And you're like, well, I think maybe I'm feeling like Tuesdays and Thursdays, maybe that's, I guess, the time. You're right? Your percent correct is high, but your confidence is low. That would be indicated as poor memory. If you are highly confident but wrong, that's also poor memory. So if somebody says, when's your class? And you're like, it's Wednesdays at 9 a.m. for sure. They would look at you and say, you got bad memory. And then in a weird way, it's kind of hard to classify, but in a weird way, being wrong and unsure is also an indication of a good memory. So if somebody says, when's your class? And you're like, well, I don't really know. I'm thinking Wednesdays at 9, but I can't be sure. If you're wrong, people would be like, yeah, your memory's not great, but it's not that bad. So this is a kind of extended example, but when you're working on your hypotheses, you can incorporate confidence in there if you need to, through that sort of like improved memory, better memory, higher memory, in certain situations. But don't feel like you need to shoehorn it in there. So if you don't set up confidence levels in the introduction, don't feel that you have to somehow address it in the discussion section. You definitely have to address it in the results section because it's part of the experiment, but we don't have to incorporate everything. So you'll remember that analysis that we did where we really have 4 major findings from this experiment. We have percent recall for correct items, percent recall for critical items, confidence for correct items, and confidence for critical items across group size. Those are 4 things. You don't have to cover all 4 with your hypotheses. But whatever you cover with your hypotheses, you have to discuss that in your discussion section. So if you say things like, well, according to Weldon and Bellinger, groups should be more confident than individuals, then in your discussion, you have to mention the results for confidence. You have to say, oh, what we found was actually this. But if you don't mention confidence in any of your predictions, then you don't have to discuss confidence in your conclusion. It's just in service of your predictions. Now, while people think of another question, I'll just make one clarification on what I just said. So what I just said is a special case for your intro to the research paper. So we're leaving it a little bit open-ended when we're writing this intro to the research paper. If we were doing this professionally and we were actually going to submit this manuscript and we never mention confidence, not in the introduction, not in the discussion section, it would be weird to encounter it in the results section. It would be weird for us to say, oh, and we also measured confidence, and here are the results, and by the way, we're never going to mention it again. Because it would kind of come out of nowhere in the method section, and it would lead to nothing after the results. So if that was the case, if we were writing this up professionally, and it just turned out that confidence didn't really fit anywhere into our write-up, we would take that part out of the results section. Right? If this was going to a professional journal, we would just say, well, we didn't use it, so let's not include that data. But this is your intro to research papers. So keep it in your results section for sure, but you are under no obligation to include hypotheses about confidence or discuss conclusions related to confidence if it doesn't fit into what you've written. Now you do need, just to be very crystal clear, you do need one or the other. You are either going to have to make predictions about percent recall, or you're going to have to make predictions about confidence, or you can do both. You can do any of that combination. So whatever is sort of, where you're at, whatever makes a consistent storyline, follow that when you do it. While we're waiting for another question as well, is everybody clear on what figures go in there? Okay, I will believe some of you. So I'll mention that real quick because I just want to make sure that everybody is on the same page. So when you're doing your in your results, we didn't do this in class because we had just in general figure 1, figure 2, see figure 1, see figure 2, and then we didn't do too much after that. Let me see if I can find. No. Where'd you go? I am trying to find my PDF that I've put in. couldn't be there. There it is. Yeah, it totally could be there. All right, so just so that you are, I guess for my own purposes, just so that you're aware. So these are the graphs of percent recall. And this up here is the main effect for item type. And this down here is the main effect for group size. And this is the interaction. Figure 1 is going to be the interaction. So figure 1 needs to be, nice. Figure 1 is this figure here. Okay, so it needs to be the figure for the interaction. And the reason that we're doing this is because in a professional journal, just kind of get you used to this, as much as I would love it, you cannot make them into picture books. Even online, they are usually like there's a limit to the number of figures that we have available. So what you typically do is that if there's an interaction, you graph the interaction. So we're going to get into that practice because I believe we found an interaction for both percent recall and confidence level. And if you remember, hopefully, when we were looking at main effects and interactions in class, this graph here of the interaction, this will let you see the interaction because you can see that the story for correct items is different than the story for critical items. But it'll also allow you to recover the main effects. So if somebody asked me, is there a main effect between correct items and critical items? So if somebody was to ask me, is there a main effect just between correct items and critical items, then I could take a look at this graph here. And I could say, if I take the average of these 3 bars, they're about up here. If I take the average of these 3 bars, they're about down there. So yeah, there is a main effect of critical versus correct items. Correct items are higher than critical. So you can recover the main effect from any interaction. So is there a difference between group sizes, for these items? For this one, you take a look at the average and it kind of looks like there might not be a difference for group size. So you can kind of recover the main effects. So it makes it more efficient when you graph the interactions. So just so that we are all on the same page, this is going to be figure 1, the interaction for percent recall. This is going to be figure 2, the interaction for confidence level. And as I was mentioning before, it has to work grayscale. So it has to be in grayscale, and it has to be in grayscale where you can see the differences between the bars. So you'll notice this is a light gray, this is a dark gray. I don't think anybody's having trouble seeing the difference between the shading there. So choose different patterns or different colors that are very easy for the reader to understand and take a look at. You'll notice that I can't remember if these were the terms that we used in the results section, but make sure that they are consistent. Group size, confidence rating, that's fine. But also notice that this is in, I believe, Papyrus as a font. That is not an APA font style. So make sure that you update that font, make sure that you have that working well. And then what I want you to make sure that you're also doing is when you put it into the Word document, so this is just one little tip on what to make sure that you do here. So you got your Word document right there, right? You can copy your, let's go to view one page. All right, so you can copy and your figure from wherever you like, and then you can go here to paste special, for example. This is the way that I usually do it, and paste it in there as a picture. That's the easiest way to manipulate your figures. So in this case, it pasted in at that size. So we'll format it here, and we're going to make it so that it is a full page image. So I'm thinking right about there. I'm thinking that's where the borders are. All right, so that's your full page image. When you do this, and this is how I'm going to do it when I grade it, just so that you have this heads up. You'll notice that this is nicely sized, right? You're reading this paper, you can see group size. You're reading this paper, you can see pair. You're reading this paper, you can see confidence rating, 2, 2.2, 2.4. You can read everything. But remember that in your published journal article, so if this was sent to the publishers, many publishers have dual column formats, and they will shrink a graph so that it can appear in just one column only. So what I will do is I will literally on your paper take your graph, and I will shrink it down, and I will ask myself, can I read this? And if the font goes too small, like it does here, then you'll lose points for it being clear and legible. So you can't do anything about the font right here, but however you like to do it, whatever kind of program you're using to create these files, whatever program you're using to modify these files, make sure that you make the font big enough. So what you can do, and I'm just going to do it real quick and not that pretty right now. But what you can do is you basically want to choose a font size that will be legible at a larger size. So for example, and again, this is just, a quick, that actually worked pretty well. So for example, you might, instead of that, choose to make make it look like that. So that is clearly a bigger font size. But importantly, when I take a look at this and I say, all right, let me shrink that down, it is still very clearly single, pair, and triple. So make sure that you choose that font size accordingly. So group size is still too small, confidence rating is still too small, but that was, but the labels there are updated. So again, when it gets handed in, it's basically the width of the page. It's on its own page, and it is labeled as figure. This one I think will be figure 2 because that's confidence level. Oh, where'd it go? That's where it went. Grab the wrong keyboard. All right, so it needs to be labeled figure 2. It needs to be not all the way up there. And this is a nice little indication that working with figures there we go. Working with figures in Word can take a little bit of getting used to, but it needs to look something like that. And then, of course, times New Roman 12 point, something like that. All right, so make sure that, again, your 2 figures that you are using are the interactions. So there is points for not having redundancy in your figures. And if you have working. If you have basically all three figures sitting there in your report, then you will lose points on that, because again, we got to make sure that it's not being redundant. Okay. Here we go. For some reason, PowerPoint was being unresponsive. All right, so once again, open floor for questions. Let me know what's come up, what you're working on. And I will let you know. All right, while people are thinking about possible questions, one other thing to mention, you can use, for the interactions, you can either use figures or tables. So I know when we were working on it in class, we said see figure 1, see figure 2, with the idea that we were going to use figures later on for our final research paper. If you're more comfortable with producing tables, feel free to do that. Make sure that you change your results section to see table 1, see table 2, instead of figure 1 and figure 2. And then make your tables, make sure they're in APA style, use the resources in your textbook, in your appendix, to go, again, for example, that checklist, to make sure that you're making those tables correct. And this will be just kind of one more thing to make sure that everybody is absolutely clear on. We rolled out different amounts of APA over the course of introducing the different sections. So when we did the method section, we basically said, all right, just a little bit of citations for Roediger and McDermott, and the other thing is headings. We're just going to work on headings. But then when we hit the results section, we were like, all right, now's a good time to introduce numbers, right? So let's take a look at how numbers are supposed to be reported in APA style. And then for the discussion section, we amped up the citations. We said, now we have all these citations. Make sure that you know how all those citations work in APA style. But APA style continued to be carried forward. So what we introduced in the method section was carried over, and you needed to do it in the results section. What we did in the results section then carried over, and you needed to do it into the discussion section. And then what we did in the discussion section carried back, and we needed to do it in the introduction. For your final research paper, all sections have to have correct APA form. So you need to make sure that the numbers that you put into your method section are the right way of doing numbers in APA style. You need to make sure that any citations anywhere now at this point are the right way of doing those citations. You need to make sure that your margins are correct all the way through. You need to make sure that your font is correct all the way through. And on that note, I will mention I fully support people using EBSCOhost and the EBSCOhost citation, tool for their, to do their reference sections. So it's a tool. It makes life easier. Use it, right? I'm not anti-EBSCOhost, but it's not always accurate. So number one, double check your EBSCOhost. And then number two, make sure that your reference section is at the font and the margins and the font size that it's supposed to be. So many times when people lose points on having Times New Roman font and 12-point font size and 1-inch margins all around, double spaced, right? That's for your entire text. So a lot of times they do it correctly the whole way through. It comes to the reference section and all of a sudden double spacing is gone because it's very clear that they went into EBSCOhost, copied that citation, and then pasted it into Word, and it's the wrong font size, it's the wrong font a lot of times, it's the wrong spacing occasionally. So make sure that, copy and paste, use that tool the way that it's meant to be used, but make sure at the end you highlight your entire reference section and then go to where you need to on Word and say, make it all 12-point New Roman, make it all double spaced. Make sure that you're doing those to make sure it's an APA style, because you get points for APA style, but APA style needs to be applied consistency. So if you need to have your paper double spaced and your reference section is not double spaced, that means that your paper is not double spaced, right? You don't get to do APA style part of the way. It needs to be a consistent style throughout. So you will lose points for double spaced if just one of your sections is not double spaced. You will lose points for Times New Roman if I get to your discussion section and all of a sudden it's Calibri. So make sure that you check through your paper for those instances, because we need to make sure consistency is part of that APA format. So you don't get to hedge your bets and try to be right half of the time by saying, if you say something like, we presented all 6 lists and later we analyzed these 6 lists, right? If you say something like that, 6 needs to be either the number 6 or the word 6. In this case, it needs to be the word 6. But you don't get to hedge your bet by saying, I'm going to write it as a word once, and I'm going to write it as a number the other time. And that way, at least I know I was right one of the times. What that indicates is that you're not aware of APA style. You haven't learned APA style. Writing it out as a word 6 both times means that you understand APA style. So just be aware of that. Your APA style has to be applied throughout the research paper. Otherwise, you will lose points for that particular aspect of APA style. And the reference section is one of the big ones for the super straightforward points of make sure your fonts are Times New Roman, make sure it's 12-point all around, 12-point font, 1-inch margins all around, double spaced the whole way through. If you're copying and pasting and using that EBSCOhost, awesome, great. Make sure that it still conforms to those requirements.
When we're writing, should it be like I hypothesized this or like we hypothesized this?
Oh, okay.
It's like we as a group
I thought-
experiment, but like the hypothesis was mine, not all.
I thought you were going somewhere else with that question. But I will answer your question, then I'll just touch on the other one. So in this case, you would do we.
Okay.
Not because we did this experiment together, but because you're writing up a multi-author paper.
Right.
So you're first author, I'm second author. So technically, we did this, we hypothesized this. And that's something that is typically done even if one person hypothesized it, right? So I didn't come up with the hypotheses for your paper. You came up with the hypotheses for your paper. But typically in a paper, it's sort of understood that the group has contributed to this, so we is used most often. Now, so that's the question for we hypothesized, and we found, we concluded. You can use that. The question I thought you were going to ask is first person versus third person. And there used to be a hard rule in APA that it was third person. First person was not allowed. And they changed it. They basically did studies that found that first person sentences have more impact and they're easier to understand. So it is easier to understand. We hypothesized that this should occur rather than it is hypothesized that this should occur, right? The we one is stronger. But they didn't come out and say that the first person should be or is correct APA style. They came out and they said it's preferred. So because of that, if you like the first person style, by all means, use the first person style, it is preferred. If, like many people who went through grad school at a certain time, the first person style has been, beaten out of you, and you just find it sort of weird, like you just can't bring yourself to do it, that's fine too. APA style allows for that third person narrative, style as well, but it is preferred. So just so you know, going forward, it is preferred to say we hypothesized this. And if you're a solo author on a paper, then I did this and I concluded and I hypothesized. So yeah, feel free to use that first person, but in this case it would be we. On that note, on the we note, do make sure that I am included as a second author. That'll only be on your title page, really, where that information is. And make sure, again, that your title page and your abstract are on point, that they're they're done APA style, because that is you can think of it this way, that is your first introduction to, sorry, that is not your first introduction. That is my first introduction to your paper. And like anything else, you want to make a good first introduction. So nothing kind of lets me know that I'm not in for a good time grading a paper than when that title page is wrong. So when I see anything but 12-point font, when people fall back on their old habits of trying to make a title page look visually appealing. APA title pages are visually boring. Make yours visually boring. It's 12-point all the way around. There's no bold, there's no italics, there's no flair. It's literally looks like a boring document, a government document. So make sure that that's the case. Make sure that your name is there. My name is there. Make sure that doctor is not there. All right, like I said, as proud as I am of attaining the degree that I have, I also love the fact that APA is very egalitarian. So it doesn't matter if you are a PhD, it doesn't matter if you have multiple PhDs, it doesn't matter if you're a high school student. If you're an author, you're an author. You're all on equal footing. So make sure that my title is not there, because it's one of the first things that I see. The and. Look it up. Make sure that make sure you're using the right and. So when it's your name and Igor Ivicevic. See, this is why we have a reference manual. I can't remember if it's an ampersand or if it's the word and. Make sure that, do you know?
Well, I just have the sample paper.
Yeah, what does it have?
It's written out, A and D.
It's written, so write it out, A and D, not the ampersand, right? So all of these sort of little details, make sure that they're done correctly, especially on that title page and that abstract, because again, that's the first thing that I'm going to see. So use that sample one experiment paper, make your title page, and then just pop the two of them up on your screen and just look back and forth and say, I'm missing that, okay. And then put it into your title page. Do the same thing for your abstract. The biggest thing for the abstract, the by far greatest error on the abstract is just indenting the abstract, indenting the first line on your abstract, like you do every paragraph except for the abstract. So again, I don't know why the abstract is not indented, but I do know it's APA style. And much like green M&Ms in a rock star's dressing room, it's an indication that, probably the rest of it is going to be poorly done APA style as well. So somebody who makes sure that all their citations are done correctly, somebody that makes sure that all of their numbers are done correctly, either numerals or when they need to be numerals, words when they need to be words, someone that makes sure that their references are in the right order, is usually the type of person that'll make sure that their abstract is not indented. So there's points for not indenting your abstract. Pick them up, get those points for sure. But do make sure that you are dedicating time for the APA style aspect of it. So go through your paper and make sure that things are done correctly throughout your paper. And if you, one sort of technique that you can use for this, let me see if I can find. All right, you know what? Let's do this. We got. All right, so this is a manuscript that I'm working on right now with a student of mine, and we're going to be submitting this. So this is the first draft, and that is why it is not it's not double spaced for sure. All right, so let me zoom in a little bit more here. Yeah, let's go with that. Okay, so when I do something like this, all right, you can see here. We got the authors here. They're in the wrong order. So this is the first draft. So we'll get, because that's F should come before K, or is it in order of dates? No, it's alphabetical and then date. This is why we have a reference manual. I'm going to be looking that up. But one thing that you can definitely do, all right, and one thing that you can help yourself with is using the find function. So if you go to Word and you just go Control F, that'll set up this, find where things are. And then what you might want to do, just kind of help you along, and I will do this when I do my references, is search for that ampersand, right? And then just kind of go through them. Use the arrows and say, all right, Lakoff and Johnson. That's an in-text citation. That's ampersand. Great. Crawford and Yudishevich, in text. Ampersand. Perfect. Another ampersand. Excellent. Ampersand in text. Ampersand in text. Ampersand in text. Ampersand in text. So you just kind of go through it to make sure that you're using the ampersands in the correct position. So, and then you would want to do the same thing and use and. Right, and this is a nice little way of just kind of, I must have not put in the right, I can't believe and is not at all in there. There we go. So this is a nice way of finding it. And look, I mean, again, this is a first draft. Immediately, I can see here, that's an in-text citation. That's supposed to be an ampersand. So this is a nice little way of using this this function, this find and replace or find function in Word to kind of help you find these references. What I also do is your citations, whether you're doing an in-text citation or you're doing a where's a not in-text citation? If you're doing an in-text citation or you're doing a parenthetical citation. So I can't find an in-text citation, but this is an in-text citation. Sorry, this is parenthetical citations because they're in parentheses. In-text citations where you mention the name of the authors in the text, and then you have the year in parentheses. In each of those cases, you have something in parentheses. You either have the authors and the year in parentheses, or you have the year in parentheses. So that is another thing that you can search for. So once again, if you go here and you just put in open parentheses, it will take you to wherever you have open parentheses. And what you can do is you can just then have your reference section next to you and start checking things off as you see them in your reference section. So I know from this that Kennedy 1982 should be in the references, Feinstein 1982, Forceville 2016, El Rafay 2009, Fang and Halloran 2013. All of those should be in the reference section. And then you can very easily just search through and find all of your citations. So you have your reference section next to you, and you make sure that all your citations, Sperber and Wilson, Wilson and Sperber, are all in your reference section. If you come across one, this is a great way to find them. If you come across one that's not in your reference section, put it in your reference section. It's cited, it needs to go into your reference section. If you go through this whole, double check of your paper, and you find that something is in your reference section and it's not cited, it needs to come out of your reference section. Or you need to find a place, to cite it. So this is, the kind of shortcuts that you can use, again, to make sure that you have all of this done correctly. Incidentally, this author and author citations, you might see these. This is for double-blind reviews. So these are for reviews where not only do you not know who's reviewing your work, but much like in this class, they don't know who they're reviewing. So this is a paper that we've reworked from one that we've handed into a double-blind review. So that's why you occasionally see author and author. There are no researchers. Well, there probably are. I should look it up. See if there is a researcher called Dr. Author. And if they work with their spouse, Dr. Author. All right. Okay. So, any other kind of questions about stuff to do? Got to fix Renaissance right there. That's not right. Got to make sure Dickerman is in the reference section. Yeah. Incidentally, just kind of do one more off the cuff remark. While we're talking about citations, while we're talking about reference sections, the mistake that EBSCOhost typically makes has to do with capitals in the title of your journal article or italics for the title of your journal name. So it is very good at getting the journal article title. It is very good at getting the journal article name. It's very good at usually doing those correctly. But your journal article title in your reference section, the title should be in paragraph form, which means that the first word is capitalized. None of the other words are capitalized. That is one of the big mistakes that EBSCOhost's citation tool will occasionally make. The other one is that the name of the journal will be in that capital form, right? So Journal of Experimental Psychology will have journal capitalized, experimental capitalized, and psychology capitalized, but it's in italics. So that's your quick way when you're reading a reference section to figure out what's the title, what's the journal article name, just visually when you're scanning through. But those two are where EBSCOhost citation tool will make the most mistakes. So if you're using that tool and you copy and paste the information into your research paper, just do a real quick check. Take a look at the title. And if there's capitals after the first word, make sure that you correct that. Take a look at the journal title. Journal title has to be in italics. Journal title has to be in full. So that's another thing that EBSCO sometimes do. So it's the Journal of Experimental Psychology General is the name of the journal, not the J of Exp General, right? Or worse, the J of XC Gen, right? That's sometimes the way that you'll see it. And of course, we know J of XC Gen is Journal of Experimental Psychology General. But that's not what goes into a reference section. That's not APA style. So again, if you copy and paste that, it's gotten you 90% of the way. But you need to go in there and say, okay, I'm going to put Ernal after J, and I'm going to put Arimental after Exp, and I'm going to put Ecology after Psi, and Earl after Gen, just to, flesh it out. All right, any final questions? Final issues? Stuff to know? Everybody feeling confident that you'll be able to complete your paper? Cool. Everybody aware of the new deadline? Everybody saw that? All right, good. That is good too. Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground today. So we're going to wrap it up right here. If you have any other questions, come up after class and let me know. But I think that was a good session, and hopefully answered some final questions about putting it all together. And that is what I wanted to cover for today.